Hello students. In the previous session, we have learned that the narrator, Mr. Dhanda, was very satisfied with the resort and he felt very comfortable talking to Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari, that is, the owners of the resort. Now, while thus chatting with the two of them, I became aware of the slightly built girl hiding behind the settee. She must have been about 8 and was sweet and charming like her mother. Her hair was closely cropped with a straight fringe across the forehead in Chinese fashion. She was in jeans and in her half-sleeved loose jersey and high boots looked a miniature jungle queen. But she was behaving a bit too timidly for one and was trying to avoid me. So, the narrator now says that while he was talking to Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari, he found that there was a girl who was hiding herself behind the sitting area. And the narrator now describes the little girl. Okay, she was an 8 years old little girl and looked so sweet and charming like her mother. And her hair was very short and her haircut was done in a Chinese fashion with a straight fringe across the forehead. Fringe means the front part of a person's hair is when cut so as to hang over the forehead. So these are called fringes, just like you can see in Barbie dolls. So that little girl had the same kind of a haircut. And again, she was wearing jeans and a half-sleeved loose jersey and long boots, and which made her look like a cute little jungle queen. Then the narrator says that he finds her behavior a little strange. It seemed like she did not want to talk to the narrator who was there as a guest, and it seemed as if the little girl was trying to avoid him and not talk to him. I could not help smiling. I saw that she was staring at me. I said, "What's your name?" and beckoned to her to come to me. Now, here we get to know that the narrator smiled looking at the little girl, and the narrator also observed that the girl was staring at him. Staring means looking at someone or something continuously. So she was looking at the narrator. Now the narrator asked her her name and moved a little towards her so that she could come to the narrator, so that she could come near him. Okay. The girl became immediately self-conscious, shook her head, and stood where she was. I called once more, "Hello, come here, dear." She blushed and again shook her head. After a second, she ran out. I thought I saw tears in her eyes. So, when the narrator called the little girl, she did not answer, but kept standing where she was. And that is why the narrator called her once again. But the girl blushed. She shook her head, got upset, and ran away from there. And the narrator could see her face, and he saw that she was in tears. The narrator saw tears in her eyes. Okay? So I suddenly became aware of an awkward pause in the room, and turning to look at the Bhandaris, I discovered that both of them were frowning, a painful look on their faces. Mr. Bhandari squeezed the arm of his wife and said apologetically, "I am sorry, Mr. Dhanda. You see, our daughter cannot hear anything nor speak. That is why she did not come to you." Okay. So, after the little girl ran away from that place, there was a total silence in the room. The narrator found it strange, and when he looked at Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari, he saw that both of them were frowning. Frowning means when one is kind of guilty or angry upon themselves. So there was a painful look on their faces. So when their little girl ran away with tears in her eyes, both of them, means Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari, felt guilty of themselves and felt it so painful. Then Mr. Bhandari quietly squeezed Mrs. Bhandari's hand, and he felt sorry and said apologetically. Apologetically means feeling sorry. Okay, so Mr. Bhandari felt extremely sorry and said to Mr. Dhanda, means the narrator, because their daughter, ran away without replying, but he knew that she could neither listen nor could speak. She was deaf and dumb. So he was feeling guilty. Means Mr. Bhandari was feeling guilty in front of Mr. Dhanda, the narrator, and felt sorry and told Mr. Dhanda the reason why she ran away. That the reason was that she was deaf and dumb. That is why she could not respond to Mr. Dhanda, the narrator, and that is why she felt awkward and ran away from there. Now, I gasped, and muttering something about being sorry, I became confused and did not know what more to say, for I was feeling ashamed at my forwardness with a child who was obviously not in a position to respond to my approaches of friendship. Okay, I vaguely felt I had wronged her and her parents. So now, when the narrator, Mr. Dhanda, got to know that their daughter Pramodini, means Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari's daughter Pramodini, is deaf and dumb, he felt so ashamed, because he realized that he should not have talked to her, because obviously when one keeps talking to someone who cannot even hear and talk and is not even being able to answer, they will react this way only. They will get upset, just like Pramodini. Their daughter got upset when just like their daughter Pramodini got upset when she was not being able to respond to Mr. Dhanda, the narrator, and that is why the narrator was feeling ashamed and guilty of himself, that why he tried talking to her. So he was simply feeling guilty about what he had done. Now, it did not take me long to see that this was a situation the poor parents had to put up with almost daily, for every day one or two guests left and new ones came along. So, here the narrator started to think about how this girl must be facing people every day, because whenever the guests who visit the resort tries to talk to her, what kind of an awkward situation the little girl must have faced every day. Maybe she gets upset every day, and that was not good. So the narrator, Mr. Dhanda, starts thinking all these things. Now, and at the very first meeting or soon afterwards, they would run into the child, be fascinated by her charm and beauty, and want to talk to her, to pet her, and so on. So the narrator also thought that as the little girl was so sweet and charming, maybe the guest who visit the resort would have tried to speak to her, to pet her. They would have tried to treat her just like we treat a child. And he thought how these things would have made this little girl feel so sad and upset. She must be running away just like she ran away from the narrator. And every time it would result in the child silently smiling, sighing, and withdrawing, leaving looks of agony on the faces of her parents. Often it would lead to lengthy explanations as to how the calamity had come about, for many of the inquisitive visitors liked to know if it was from birth or the result of an accident, whether anyone else in the family suffered from a similar disability, and if any treatment was being given. So Mr. Dhanda, the narrator, also thinks that there might be some guests who would try to know and ask how this happened, um, how this little girl Pramodini, the daughter of the resort owners Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari, became deaf and dumb. They would have tried to know if she is deaf and dumb by birth, or it happened because of some accident or because of some disease. So the narrator thought that people must be, wanting to know all these things. And because of all these things, the parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari, were never been able to remove it from their minds that their child Pramodini is disabled. So the narrator, Mr. Dhanda, keeps on thinking all these things. So now, students, we will stop here for now, and I want you to read the chapter till I have read and explained. It will help you understand the chapter well, and we will continue the further chapter in the next session.